used to talk about an informal role taken on by experienced teachers for many years now, particularly in the US. And there's been a lot of literature and a lot of research around the topic. I've become interested in teacher leadership more recently as a way of looking at professional learning and development for experienced teachers. Now, I'd just like to get a sense of who you are and what your experience is. So, I know you've all been saying hello in the chat box, and it's great to see so many people there. Could you now, in the chat box, write down how many years experience you have as a teacher? How many years have you been teaching? Wow, fantastic. Some good amounts of experience here. Anything from 5 to over 20. Wonderful. Thank you. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this framework. This is the Cambridge English Teaching Framework that was developed by Cambridge Assessment English, and it's actually freely available on their website. This is just an overview document, and I'm just going to explain it a little because you may not be able to see it very clearly. On the left, you have 5 rows, and those outline the areas of competency for teachers. So there are 5 categories there: learning and the learner, teaching, learning and assessment, language ability, language and knowledge and awareness, and professional development. Now, each of those categories has a number of competencies for teaching that are described in detail. There are descriptors for each one. So, for example, under teaching, learning and assessment, you might have descriptors for teaching grammar or teaching skills or classroom management competencies. So that's the categories, which are the rows, the teaching competencies. And along the top, you'll see 4 stages of development. And they go from up to expert, basically. So, and the first 2 stages are really once you've done your initial teacher training and your first few years of teaching. Now, there are no set times for progression. I think, as we all know, everybody progresses at different stages in terms of their development. So the first 2 stages, really from initial training through developing, those, I would say generally it's the first few years, up 3 years of teaching or so. And there tends to be a lot of support available, I think, for teachers there. There are lots of training courses, books, many practical books with ideas, so you can improve the quality of your teaching. Tends to be when you get to those proficient and expert stages that there's less in the way of practical development for you. There tend to be more specialised courses perhaps, or perhaps more research-focused literature. However, from what the research tells us about teaching, that the single biggest impact on learner outcomes is the quality of teaching, then it's critical that there are opportunities to develop the quality of your teaching once you get to those expert and proficient stages, and not just at the earlier stages of development. Research before indicated that typically a teacher after their initial training would continue to improve the quality of their teaching for the first 3 years, and after that they would plateau or level off. But that's actually, more recent research has disproved that. And now what research is telling us is that Again, typically teachers improve their quality for the first 3 years, but then it doesn't have to be static. And in fact, in schools that are not very supportive, teachers can actually decline in the quality of their teaching. But where there is a supportive learning environment, you can continue to develop the quality and continue way past those 3 years. And this is why, for more experienced teachers, I see the teacher leadership construct as a really rewarding route for continued growth and development. So, in this talk, we are going to look at the what, the why, the what, and the how of teacher leadership. What is teacher leadership? Why would you want to be a teacher leader? What does it involve? And how do you go about it? So, on to the first question. What is teacher leadership? I'm going to show you 2 definitions from the literature about teacher leadership and just give you a minute or 2 to read through them. Okay, and I'll move on to the second definition. Okay, I hope everybody's had a chance to read them. I'd like to focus on some of the key ideas on teacher leadership. So I've put the 2 definitions side by side here, and you'll see I've gapped them. So can you just take a few minutes to see if you can complete the gaps? And it would be wonderful if you could put any of your thoughts, what might go in the gaps, into the chat box so I can see how we're working through it. Okay, great. We've got the first suggestion for a gap. Wonderful. A few more suggestions coming in. Fantastic, thank you. And let's see now how it matches up with the originals. I think you've pretty much got those. The first gapped word was influence, and it appears in both definitions, and it's really one of the key ideas of teacher leadership, that the teacher is involved in the process of influencing others. Second key idea, improvement. It's all about improving both teaching and learning. That's another key concept. And the third idea I'd like to pull out, which is in the second definition, which is where the word beyond comes in, is that it's not just about your classroom and your learners, it's looking beyond your classroom, influencing others and other teachers, and possibly even school policies and practices. So, as the definition suggests, it's actually quite a challenging role, involving influence beyond your classroom. And it's, as I mentioned, it's not a formal role. It's not a management position. There's no pay increase. So why would anyone want to do it? Why would you want to do it? Can you just think of a few reasons why, as maybe part of your development as an experienced teacher, you would like to develop as a teacher leader? And again, wonderful if you could perhaps write a few suggestions in the chat box. Nothing's come up yet. Maybe there's a little bit of caution. Maybe you don't quite know enough about it. Oh, sorry, now there are some ideas. Yep, fantastic. Okay, I'm going to share some thoughts I had, some reasons why. I mean, I love that idea of wanting to have an impact, of wanting to help and support others and develop others. It's a really, I guess when people write about effective teachers and what makes a good teacher, I guess a lot of that is what comes into the experience, wanting to share, wanting to inspire, wanting to have an impact. So I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that it's very pleasing to see. Well, here's my list. Obviously, it's a form of professional development. It's a structure for developing your teaching expertise, but also other skills. So organizational skills, problem solving. It's a way of actually building relationships with your colleagues and also developing collaborative skills, communicative skills as you work with others. It can lead to increased student engagement and student learning, student achievement. You can contribute beyond your classroom to teaching and learning practices across the school, leading to whole school improvement. And of course, it's nice to be recognised, to be appreciated for what you do. You can gain recognition for your expertise from your peers and from your management. And all of this can lead to increased motivation and job satisfaction, and that's been borne out in studies around this. I mean, as I said, it's not a formal role, so it's one that you choose to take on. And in fact, sometimes you're actually almost taking it on without realising. It may be that you're the experienced teachers that others look to for guidance, for support, for advice. So, from the chat box, some of you seem interested in this, so I guess the next question is, what does it involve? If you think it's rewarding and it might provide a description of how you can further develop and influence others and play a role in enhancing student learning beyond your classroom, then what's next? What's involved and what steps can you take? Now this is taken from the literature, and it's just one model of how teacher leadership might work. I'll just give you a minute. I hope you can read the text. So it goes anti-clockwise, reading from A at the top all the way around to I. So if you could just take a minute to read that. Now, you'll have noticed as you've read round that the activities are incremental, in that A and B, for example, focus on the individual teacher, and that expands out in C, D, E to your working with your colleagues and collaborative practices. And then it goes through FGH to perhaps influencing your school community and beyond your school community. I think it's a very logical model based around the central goal of improving student learning. I mean, possibly I would, the final one about going beyond your institution and professional organisations, I mean, I think that could possibly come in at any earlier stage. But I think this is a useful model to look at. Now, we're not going to go through all the stages today that they've identified, because each one builds on the other, and you're likely to be more engaged if you've progressed through. So I'm really going to just take a look at what activity can be done that relates really to the first 5. So looking at developing your teaching expertise even further, and collaborating with colleagues. So these are the 5 areas that we're going to look at in particular. Okay. And I think in essence, they boil down to these 2 things: developing your teaching expertise and developing your influencing skills. And that's through engaging in ongoing professional learning and reflective practice. And again, this is really important, not just because it's developing the quality of your teaching and supporting your learners' outcomes, but it's also modelling best practice, modelling professional behaviour. And that's really important. If you want to take others on board, of course, they need to respect and trust you. So by engaging in this sort of professional practice of ongoing development, that's really powerful. And then when you're in that position, then you have many opportunities to work collaboratively with your colleagues in both formal and informal settings, where you can build influence and manage change. So, you're still here. So, the next step is, I guess, moving on to the more practical. How do you go about doing these things? Now, improving your practice. Research shows, there's been a lot of research, I think over the past 6 years particularly, that development activity is most effective when it's based around your needs and your learners' needs, and it's classroom based. And it's through trying out new techniques and practices in your classroom you can see the impact on your learners and refine your practice. And I think this is especially true. You're very experienced teachers. You've had many years of fine-tuning your craft. And it's really important to actually focus on the particular needs of your learners in your context. You'll see on the right there's it's a Cambridge paper on effective professional development principles and best practice. And that synthesises that research I referred to. So it pulls together the research of the last, say, 6 years, and it identifies 7 principles for effective professional development. And in practice is one of those key principles for really improving the quality of your teaching. Oh, and if you're interested in reading more about that, the paper is on the Cambridge University Press website and it's free to download. So let's think for a moment about what classroom-based development might look like. Now, I think most of you are going back to the classroom on the 14th of September, so you don't have a class at the moment. So I'd like you to think of a class of learners that you had last year. So can you just think of one particular class that you had last year and visualize that class? You might want to just put in the chat box the name of the class. 7A seems to be popular. Oh, but no, we've got a range. Okay. Okay, so you've got your group of learners. 10 is popular. You've got your group of learners. Now, I want you to think of just one thing which would help their learning. Now, if I think back to classes I taught, it might be, if they would learn better, if they would only concentrate more in class, concentrate for longer. Another class, very frustrating. They would learn more if they actually took risks, if they actually spoke more in class, if they were more confident about speaking. Okay, so in terms of our classroom-based practice for improvement, hopefully we've all identified an issue. Okay. Yep, I think quite a few of you, the word collaboration is coming up about students collaborating. So you've got an issue that you've identified for that class. Their learning would improve if they were more confident in speaking, etc. So the next step would actually be to find out possible solutions for this. We could go off now to the bookshelf in the teacher's room, have a little look to see what ideas there might be. We might Google it, see what suggestions there are. We might go and talk to other teachers to see if they've got any suggestions. But right now, we can't do that, although you could possibly Google. Right now, we can try and think of ideas ourselves. So, for example, for my learners who can't concentrate, I think that's a problem. Maybe it's actually that I'm not providing enough variety in my classroom. Maybe my activities are too long and I need to think about shorter activities or a more variety of my presentation, so I engage them more at the beginning. Or with my learners who aren't confident speaking, maybe it's because I need to give them more safer tasks or tasks they can achieve, that are easier, they get success, they build their confidence. Maybe more planning time. Maybe they need to rehearse more or to repeat the tasks several times to improve their fluency and confidence. So my second step is coming up with a number of possible solutions to the issue. So I've got a range for the speaking. So I'm just going to pick one of them, decide what to do next. So I'm going to choose one of my possible solutions and experiment in class. So for example, speaking, I think they need more repetition. The research shows that actually encourages fluency. So I'm going to try a task. I'm going to watch a certain group of learners to see how they respond. So for example, I could do a task. They have 2 minutes to do the speaking activity. Then I change groups. They have 1 minute to do it with another group. So it's almost like it kind of adds a bit of fun, competition too. And then they do it a third time in 30 seconds with another group. And the research tells me that actually is very positive in developing fluency. So I experiment in class. I watch a group of learners and I think, well, how did that go? Actually, maybe it wasn't as wonderful as I thought. In fact, it didn't work as well as I expected. So I need to think about why, what happened. And then I think, well, actually, I just pushed them into that task and thought repetition would solve it, but I didn't give them enough planning time. So then, okay, next time I do a speaking, I will really scaffold the planning. So I try again. Scaffold it this time with scaffold planning before the repetition activities. And then I reflect on it, and yes, much more positive outcomes. So the in-practice experimentation cycle is actually needs to go over time to be embedded in practice, because we're never going to get it right the first time. And one critical element of the cycle is reflection. Now, again, reflecting on practice is very powerful, but often it's not done, I think often it's kind of done in a very cursory surface way and not really in depth as it needs to be. I mentioned 7 elements of effective professional development, which the research has shown, and reflection is another one of them. So it can be really powerful if done correctly. So I'd like you to think about, when you think about what happened in your classroom, and I think we've already got a definition in the chat box. You're one step ahead of me, but I wonder if you could just complete this sentence. Reflection is. And again, please type anything in the chat box. I like some of the comments. The gates of wisdom, very nice. Conscious consideration. Yep. Lots of deep thinking, critical thinking. Yep. Wonderful. Some really nice sentence completion there. And I'll just give you share with you how I finish the sentence here. So as many of you have said, it's remembering what happened, deciding if it was successful, and the why. I think that's where your critical thinking, your deep thinking is coming in. And that's really important, because nothing will change if you don't understand why. A quick true-false question. True or false? Pop your answer into the chat. Yes. Yep. I certainly agree with it. I mean, considering different points of view is a sign of developed reflection skills, and you know we're reflecting in order to improve our teaching, not to show that we're perfect teachers. So we do need to be honest and open. Now, actually, we do need guidance when reflecting, though, because thinking deeply without structure, you know, might not lead us to new insights. So I've got 5 questions here, 5 reflection questions, which I think can really guide your thinking, really guide your deep thinking when you're reflecting. But of course, I've gapped them. So I'll give you a minute or two to see if you can complete the gaps. And again, please do write in the chat box. Okay, I think pretty much everyone's got the has matched the first answer. Not necessarily all of them, but I think you've got most of them. So let's have a look. I think everybody had what did they learn? Second one's very important. What evidence do you have? How do you know they learned that? I think sometimes it's very easy to get caught up in perhaps teaching. We teach through a course book. Students come in, we work through the course book, they leave. And how do we know what it is that they've left the classroom knowing that they didn't know when they came in? And then, of course, the connection between teaching and learning always. What did you do specifically that helped them? Could you have done things differently so they learned faster? And what did you learn about your teaching? So I think those 5 questions are really helpful in guiding your deeper thinking, your critical thinking, and can be applied to any lesson. So I think now we've looked at, I guess, a process for developing your teaching expertise through your in-practice with your learners, identifying a problem, finding solutions and reflecting, and just keeping that process going so that any changes are embedded in your practice. Second area we identified for teacher leadership was collaboration, influencing your colleagues, being collaborative. Just give you a minute to read those 2 quotes. As you can see, again, there's been a lot of research on collaboration, peer collaboration over recent years, and it is one of the 7 aspects for effective development, and it really strengthens expertise and allows for opportunities to influence others and implement change. Again, there's one piece of research looked at the value of collaboration, as we've talked about, the in-class experimentation. If you're told that something is a good way of working, a good method, a good approach, evidence shows that that doesn't really lead to change. Again, it's through doing that we actually manage to manage change. So, over to you again. In what ways do you collaborate with your peers? Now, some of you may do this a lot, but I just say a couple of years ago, we, in a questionnaire around teacher development, we found that this was something that not many teachers at all really engaged in fully. I think there was always been a sense that perhaps teaching is like an egg carton, everybody's in their separate area. And it really is a very powerful way for development and influencing. So I'd be very interested to know what you do in your schools or out of your schools. And I think some of you have started putting some ideas in the chat box, so wonderful to see some more. So Facebook communities, Okay, it's nice to talk about a teaching team. Seems a bit of sharing, exchanging ideas, and I wonder how, I suppose, how formal or informal you do that. Yeah, a lot of sharing, meetings. Okay, great. So once a month, so some formal meetings. Okay, and just chatting. Okay. Okay, I'm going to run through a couple of collaborative practices and say how you can exert influence through them. Yes, I've just seen, yes, online meetings at the moment. Okay, so here's a few collaborative practices, and I'll just talk around them a little. Now, I don't think anybody mentioned shared lesson planning. Obviously, working with a colleague who teaches the same level or the same age learners, it's a great opportunity to share experience and ideas when planning, and it might lead you to trying something that you just wouldn't have thought of normally. So that's a great way to, if you're involved in that, you can influence others through suggesting practices that person might not have thought of before. Similar in a way to team teaching. This is perhaps more difficult to do logistically because you might not have the free time to join another teacher to teach. But again, it's a wonderful way of developing collegiality, and it allows you to experience other styles of teaching that you might not have thought of, and to also see the learner's response to that. Peer observation. Again, there might be logistical challenges with this, although it is possible, increasingly possible with technology to record your own classroom. Now, I think this potentially could be threatening, thinking of somebody coming in your classroom, judging you, but in fact, with a pre-agreed focus, it's a really positive experience. If a teacher is coming into your class to look at the learners and not your teaching, then that's really where the focus should be. So, and the teacher can identify things that you might not have noticed, things about the learners and learner behaviour. So it can be very rewarding. But as I say, it's really important to be supportive and non-judgmental. Coaching or mentoring, of course. Just to distinguish, coaching is really about improving practice. So maybe there are specific development goals, and you're working with somebody who's giving feedback on strengths and weaknesses with the goal of improving practice, like a football coach. And again, that's actually quite challenging to pitch because, again, as a peer, as a colleague, you want to be supportive. And mentoring, again, that's when some places have formal mentoring systems and some more informal, but it's when an experienced teacher is supporting a newer teacher, and it tends to be responsive. So you're responding to the teacher's needs and questions they have around the teaching process. But again, both of those are opportunities where you can support and influence. Reading groups. These can be fun and handled in many different ways. So, for example, You could meet once a term, once a month. You could have a different person choosing either a book or an article that everybody reads, or it could be that two people read it and they synthesize and share the information, and you discuss how it might apply to your practice. And again, that's, I mean, it's good for all experience of teacher, but I guess when you're more experienced and you might be reading more applied linguistics or titles around the latest research, then that can be really interesting to think, does it apply to our context? And of course, again, you can exert influence through topics and the conversations in the group. Idea sharing forums. These can be great fun. At a school where I'm a governor, a secondary school, they have these every term, but every teacher who wants to take part has 3 minutes to present an idea, and they're cut off after 3 minutes. So it's quite a lot of energy, and a lot of ideas are shared in the time, and so there's always something for somebody to take away. So setting up an ideas sharing forum can be a great energizer and motivator. Collaborative inquiry. Now this is kind of moving on from as an individual influencing other teachers to actually working with groups of teachers, which might ultimately lead in changing some of the practices in your school. So this is similar to what you're doing, what you might do as an expert teacher investigating your own classroom. It's a group of teachers engaging jointly into a shared problem of practice. So in pairs or small groups, you might identify a problem. It might be in your school that actually the learners just aren't engaging with the learning materials. You might think, well, why is it? Is the level of the book perhaps not the right level? Too difficult, too easy for those learners? Not the right level of challenge? The topics not appropriate for them. They're not engaging, they're not interested in the topics of the book. Or it might be that there's just not enough speaking practice, for example. So as a group, you might try and find out what the cause is. So you'd all investigate and come back together and share your findings. And if, for example, you did find that for whatever reason the group just wasn't working with your learners, it wasn't just one class, it was across the age group, then you're in a position to speak to the decision maker and get the course book changed, for example. Another one that's a group activity is group reflection on critical incidents. And this, for example, so again, a small group, you might monitor your teaching for a period of time. It could be a term, a month, and you note down any critical incidents that you experience. Now, a critical incident is when something in the class has not gone as expected, and it's an opportunity for learning. It's not one of your everyday things, but something you really didn't expect. And it might be that when you meet, you have a written account, so you note down. You might have some set questions about this that you might want to answer. And then you meet with your group and you share your experience. So you've actually reflected on it, you've written it down, and you tell your group what you've learned from it. And that idea is expanded more fully in the book. I've just put the book cover there by Jack Richards, about 50 tips for teacher development. There are a number of ideas in there. So again, this is a way where you're a community and you're looking at improving practice. And again, it might lead on to whole school practice. And I just actually have an example of a critical incident here. So I just wonder, has anyone experienced anything like this? When students, a whole group of students, I mean, in classes there are different personality types and not everybody is comfortable with everything and doesn't want to join in. But have you ever experienced a whole group that doesn't want to do group work? No, maybe in your teaching context you have learners that are happy to participate and understand perhaps the value of developing those communicative skills, but certainly there are instances. You're very lucky. So we've had a bit of a swift run through of ways of developing using the sort of teacher leadership construct as a way, a route for development for experienced teachers. And I just want to sum up really. The focus should always be on improving learning, thinking about what areas in your classroom you can improve, thinking about a process of experimentation and reflection that's ongoing. It's important that this is sustained over time for true change to happen. And where you're developing your teaching expertise, you're modelling professional behaviours for those around you. So you're developing trust and respect from your colleagues. And then when you're comfortable, you're sharing your learnings. It sounds like a lot of you are sharing ideas already. And you're collaborating with colleagues and extending your influence that way. And I think it also sounds like a lot of what you've been doing is quite, I suppose, informal sharing. And I think that some of the ways that I've outlined here of collaborative practices, slightly more formalised, but can be actually quite powerful because I guess they're more scaffolded. So I guess there are more opportunities for reflection and finding solutions, addressing problems within them. And that, of course, leads you to think, how many of these issues are widespread across our learners, our institution, and are there ways that we actually need to address some of the whole school practice? So I think it's a very rewarding model for continued development at this kind of more proficient and expert level of teacher. And I hope some of you agree with that. Just got a minute. Perhaps you could write down in the chat box if anything has occurred to you through the session, if there's one area that you would like to investigate with your learners, where you would like to try and affect change once your term starts. And also if there's one new way of collaborative practice that you think you might like to try out in your institution. It'd be lovely just to see some of your ideas, what your areas of interest are. That's good to know. Sharing forums are useful. Team teaching has come up a couple of times. Okay, great. And we're at the end of the session, so I'm going to finish with this final thought for you by the educator Dylan William. And I really like that. It just stresses the point that learning is an ongoing process. No matter how good we are, we can be even better. So, thank you very much.